Hello, Michael Brenninger here.
Hey, yeah, there should be sound. I'm keeping everybody muted. There's a message in the chat. Sorry, I sent that to Zach privately, which I did not mean to do. I'm keeping everybody muted. I have this set up as a Zoom call instead of a webinar because we didn't prepare slides, and I also want people to ask questions and have this to be more of a discussion. And it's great if you're comfortable for other people to see your faces, I think.
Yeah, no, it's okay. For some reason, I wasn't able to access the Zoom meeting through the Zoom link, so I just called in and used the meeting ID and the password.
Cool.
Kept asking me to, yeah.
If you want to, I'm trying to think of the best way to get to people.
Well, yeah, if there's not really a visual component to it other than, FaceTime, I'm okay with just audio.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's no really slides other than this time. I've kind of run into a few calls recently where I have had to call in and have not seen stuff. So I was hoping that this would be a little bit better, but
Sure.
So cool.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I'll go ahead and mute myself again, and I'll just listen along.
Awesome. And for what it's worth, we're recording this. So if you talk to anybody who's like, oh, I wish I could have participated, I will share the link when we're done.
That's great. That's good. Yeah, because I was going to have to jump off a little on the early side, so I'll just catch up with the recorded version and catch anything I missed. Cool.
All right, I'm gonna mute everybody just so we can get a few more people admitted. And let me know. I'm going to be like muting the group just to avoid background noise, but you can unmute yourselves. So
sure,
you have that power.
Okay.
But we'll give folks a few more minutes and then get moving. I am so excited to see so many people signed up for this and very overwhelmed. So.
Yeah, no kidding. I said, wow. Yeah, I'm assuming these are all folks who are interested in running.
I hope that's why everybody's here. No, even if you're not, I hope that you learn some stuff about how the district works and how ANCs work and
Sure.
how to stay involved in your neighborhood. So of course I would love everybody to run because I think it's really important, but even if you don't, I hope that this will be useful, and we can of course talk a little bit more about this, and my inbox is always open for suggestions, but we're always looking for more ways to get people more like dynamically involved in GGWash, and figuring out how to do that with remote communication has been really interesting and has opened up a lot of possibilities. So I'm looking forward to learning more. Cool. All right, I think we just sort of slowed to a trickle on letting people in. Yeah, I think our default Zoom setting is that you have to set up a Zoom account, which like for the corporate accounts makes sense. So sorry for any hiccups on that. But again, we will be sharing this. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Alex Baca. I'm the housing program organizer at Greater Washington. I also work on our elections. So we endorse candidates for DC Council in Maryland and Virginia. I am, as a sidebar, always looking for elections committee volunteers. I can share more about that later. But we also endorse for ANCs, which is like a pretty crazy undertaking that I am also really proud of, and I think is a really cool component of our work. So in addition to endorsing for ANCs, you kind of have to recruit for ANCs. And for those of you who are familiar with the positions, that kind of makes sense. They're these really low level positions, but still very powerful. That are decided by, sometimes a handful of votes, and sometimes can be super competitive. So it's a really interesting function of governance. I think it's a very cool thing that DC has. And for the first time in 2018, we endorsed candidates. It was a considerable undertaking, but I think it was a huge value to our supporters, to our readers, and it's allowed us to facilitate some really awesome connections. I often say that the best thing for an ANC commissioner to be is just competent and thoughtful and responsive to emails. You may have differing views from us on housing and transportation. You know, while I would love everyone to agree with us all of the time, it doesn't have to be like that. I think the best thing that you can be is just thoughtful and representative of your neighbors and open to feedback. So my goals for this sort of cycle is to get people involved with this, to get them to run, to get them to engage, to be able to answer their questions, get you all through the signature collection, the petition stuff, get you through campaigning, assist write-in candidates, which is kind of another chunk of stuff, and then help you all out once you have presumably won all of your elections, except for, like, I hope none of you are running against each other, but like we can talk about that later. I want to make sure that we're supporting you going forward. I linked to Nick's awesome piece. He's on our call tonight about sort of the ups and downs of being an ANC commissioner. And I hope in some ways that while we work towards a greater policy solution for the district in supporting ANCs, we can give you at least some of the information that you need to know. So that is kind of the gist of why we're doing this. I'm expecting all of you to be somewhat high information since you're, on a GGWash call on a Thursday night, and thank you for spending your time with us. But ANCs are advisory neighborhood commissions. There are around 260 something commissioners across the city. They are divided up by ward and then by neighborhood commission and then into single member districts. That's about how that works. When you run for a seat, you are running for a single member district on a commission. So you will have counterparts and you'll represent about 2,000 people. There are a whole bunch of ins and outs to ANCs. I'm not going to go into that right now. We can talk about that later. I know a couple of you on here are either existing ANCs, are serving on some ANC committees but are not commissioners, and I hope that if people have questions about that, you can speak to that too. In terms of endorsement timeline, we're trying to get information out to people about running. We will be circulating questionnaires to commissioners, and I will drop a link in the chat once we get going for our 2018 endorsements so you can get a sense of what they were. We'll be starting to work on those endorsements and circulate those questionnaires probably in September. So that is after the August 5th filing deadline. But with enough time to accommodate write-in candidates as they move forward. The asterisk for write-in candidates is that a lot of times you don't have people declaring for these seats. So there is an opportunity to run as a write-in. And I think Nick also, he's very much on the spot tonight, can talk about that also since he ran as a write-in. So we have a lot of stuff to cover. We have some awesome people here that I am super stoked you're able to join us. Rob Dooling is a former commissioner who is running again and is also an incredible civic activist that I know through biking and transportation stuff. He'll be able to talk to you about not just ANCs, but how ANCs are one of many ways to be involved in your neighborhoods. And since he's currently running, can answer some questions about petition pickup. Nick Chiolis is a Ward 5 commissioner who is stepping down, who wrote a fabulous post for us today, and also ran as a write-in. James Harnett is a GW student and has been doing an awesome job in 2A. He is also not running again, but has done some really incredible stuff in West End, and I hope he'll be able to talk about some of his projects and initiatives as an ANC commissioner. And Zach Teusch, who's in Petworth, is a masterful campaigner who is so much better at this stuff than I am, and did some awesome work in Petworth, especially with bus activism in his time on ANCs. So I am super proud to call all these people friends, and it's very great to have them here. That's kind of my rundown for stuff. We have been running posts on the blog to sort of fills in some of the gaps. Most of the information that you need is on the BOE website. And you know, you can follow that, but I'm also available for questions. I think at this point, everyone has my email address. I know I've done one-to-ones with a couple of you, and a lot of you are new to me, which is amazing. Again, thank you for being here. I'm gonna drop some stuff in the chat, but I would love for us to just get started talking. We can use the raise hand function. You can unmute and talk. I think we're all a pretty respectful bunch, but just tell me what is useful for you and we can answer your question, because we have people here as resources, and based on the conversations that I've had, I think that's the most useful thing that we can do right now. So we're a little bit agendaless, but I'm hoping that this can serve as a more flexible discussion, which is also why we're recording it. Yes, financial donations. This has come up a couple of times, and somebody who is not me should maybe answer this question. The maximum donation is $25, and that is what I've got for you. So if someone else can speak to that, that would be awesome. Zach, this might be a good question.
Sure. Hi, it's really good to be here with everybody. My name is Zach Teutsch. I served for a couple of terms in ANC 4C, which is Petworth and the environs. I stepped down to do a little more political work, which isn't required, but I just had a limited amount of time. It turned out to have been a pretty good investment because Janice Lewis George won her primary. So that was super exciting. And some of the work that I did as an ANC really helped build some of the connections, some of the support for that campaign. So anyway, getting back to the fundraising question, you're entitled to raise money. You can raise up to $25 at a time, or sorry, $25 total per person per cycle. You are not, as last I checked, required to open a specific campaign bank account, but it is important to keep track. So a spreadsheet is a pretty good way to do it. And if you raise more money than you need, then you can donate it to a local nonprofit. So it's a good idea to raise at least some money. It's probably not a good idea to spend most of your time or energy on raising money, because it all has to do with what's your campaign plan. And to win, the easiest way to win is be the only person on the ballot. Which seems like I'm joking, but I'm actually dead serious. The earlier you register and get on the ballot, then everybody else thinks to myself, shit, do I want to have to run against somebody else? And they usually decide no. So the best part of your campaign plan should be get on the ballot before other people if you can. If you are on the ballot and so is somebody else, by all means sit down with them and see if they're great and consider dropping out and endorsing them, or having them drop out and endorse you. But if you end up in a competitive campaigning situation, by far the most effective thing you can do is talk to neighbors, which by now means calling neighbors, emailing neighbors, being accountable and accessible to neighbors. And very little of that costs money. It's probably a good idea to set up a website, which you could do as a Facebook page in addition to, or a standalone website. It's probably a good idea to make sure that it's easy for people to like it or to email you. A lot of people have a lot of hesitation about sharing their information, but it tends, if you feel comfortable doing it. My experience has been that mostly people reach out with great respect and kindness. And I'm also a white man, which means that I'm subjected to somewhat less of the abusive shit that, so there's some privilege to giving out your information. But I would suggest that that's also, generally speaking, free. So in terms of raising money, the thing is, what are you really going to do that costs money? It's really hard to run digital ads or mail narrowly enough to affect an ANC race, and it's almost never done. When I've run previously, I printed out palm cards, you know, cards about this size that I could hand out to people while we were talking. If I see them, if I knocked on their door back when that was a thing that we did, or if you talk to people in a socially distanced voting setting, you can also pass out some lit. So your lit will cost money, but you really don't have much expenditure. The main expenditure will be your time and your volunteers' time. So before you run, I would think to yourself, is this something, do I really want to meet my neighbors and hear what they have to say and fight for them and advocate for them? And if the answer is yes, it could be an awesome job. You know, in my time on the ANC, I used it as a platform to help advocate along with Greater Washington and GG Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner group for an express bus lane on 14th Street. And without being a commissioner and without or Greater Washington, there's no chance we would have won. And I just also got to meet some amazing people. I see Randy Downs is on the call, and we've been friends ever since we worked on that campaign together. And it's awesome. And I think, you know, you can do a lot of good. It can create wonderful lifelong relationships. And it's fine to raise money. Make sure you keep track of it, because you really don't want to run afoul of, you know, you don't want to end up getting a big fine for screwing it up. But it's actually pretty easy. Just make a spreadsheet, note the money that comes in, note the money that goes out. There won't be that much coming in and that much going out, and it'll be easy to keep track of. And don't focus too much on raising money unless there are actual campaign expenditures that seem strategic that you want to expend money on.
Awesome, thanks. I think there's also a question of how to campaign on a shoestring. I think you sort of got at that, but kind of what do you do? And Alex, feel free to jump in if I'm butchering your question. What do you do if somebody's spending like crazy, but you're more effective with less money? How do you target and how do you prioritize things?
Well, yeah, so that's a great question. People who spend more money don't always win elections. Just ask Brandon Todd. You know, the way you win elections is by listening to people, talking to people, showing a real serious commitment to them and to their issues, and showing up with good values, and all those things are free. If somebody's spending $1,500, they're probably doing some stupid stuff. They're probably, for instance, advertising in a way that gets to a lot of people who aren't in the single member district. You know, I think you want to target your effort. You can get a voter file. Has anybody gotten the voter file yet? The Board of Elections should give it to you. And this year's version has phone numbers on it, right? Yes?
I think if somebody provides phone numbers.
Oh, so some do, some don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you can get, if you want to call people, you can find somebody who has a commercial voter file. You can pretend and can do some geolocation work, but that's fairly complicated. But if you were going to spend money, that's what you would spend money on, is figuring out how to get a list of phone numbers in your SMD and calling those people. Let's see, there's a whole bunch of questions here in the chat. Let me, how much time does it take to do the job well? I'm sure a whole bunch of other panelists have ideas. My experience was to meet all your responsibilities takes at least 4 hours a month. To do a really good job takes about double that. And some people do an exceptional job, which is more like 4 or 5 hours a week, but it varies a lot by week. At what point do you know how many people are going to be on the ballot? People stop being able to request petitions on the 5th. Does anybody have handy the date that BOE certifies people? There's a deadline. You have to turn in your signatures by a certain date, and then BOE decides who, and then there's a challenge period. If you think the other, if somebody else picked up petitions. Let me say, if you're thinking about it, register right now and you can always withdraw. And you might persuade somebody else not to run who would be less awesome and community focused and just or whatever. So pull your petitions now. Lots of people pull petitions and then don't return them. And lots of people who do return them screw it up and are challengeable, and you can get them so they don't have ballot access. I would not do that unless you think the person is like, wouldn't be good for the community. But if you think you'd be really good for community and the other person wouldn't be good for community, you should use the tools that are available to you. And one of them is checking their, like, you have a voter file, you can see who signed their thing and whether in fact they're in the single member district and they're on the, you know, on the file. Lots of people screw it up. Lots of people have multiple, never bother validating their signatures. And so you don't know how many of them are bad. Candidate list, $25, I believe, can come from anybody in the United States. There's no limit to the SMD. Oh, here we go. All right, good. Anybody have any other questions specifically about fundraising? Oh, Rob, why don't you take it away, friend? Rob, you're on mute still. Oh, he's.
Alex, I think his person might need to be unmuted and is on one of the phone numbers. If you can unmute the phone numbers.
Yes, let me try to do that. Thanks, Kaya. Let's see.
Well, you're figuring that out. I think I might field the, how do you get,
sorry, how about now? I think this is Rob's interpreter. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Awesome, thanks.
Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, let me just double check. One second here.
I'm also trying to figure out how to turn on the.
Okay, so you guys can hear me, right? I just want to make sure you guys can all hear me.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, good question about creative ways to earn signatures. We set up tables in hot spots in our areas, in front of apartments or in front of grocery stores. You can make people feel safer if you have a mask on as well. You just need to sit at the table, and usually we have all the stuff out. You're able to continue to socially distance, and you can ask them if they're registered to vote. Are you registered to vote here? Oh, would you like to mind signing to help us get on the ballot? I've seen some people do that outside, and they've had a lot of success with that.
I've also seen people actually put up posters in remember, only people from the single member district are eligible to sign your petition. So you really want to make sure that people who live right near you, I mean, a lot of these are really small, like 4 or 5 blocks. So one thing that I've seen people do is put up a poster that says, you know, hey, it's COVID, so we're being super secure. Hi, I'm, you know, Zach, smiley picture of Zach or whatever. And I love to serve our community and I need some signatures. So you can go to this place and learn more about what I'm doing and call me and we can arrange like a safe place, and I'll leave the petition out like right in front of my house on a table with a pen, and you can, you know, sign, just let me know when's a good time. Like people are around a lot of the time now because like not a lot of people are going into the office. So The other thing is, like, if you live in a place with foot traffic, you can actually just set up and like talk to people as they come by. People are often very, very starved for social engagement these days. You might find it easier to strike up a chat than you would under other circumstances.
The traditional sort of collecting of signatures, like a lot of, I want to echo Rob's point, is that like doing this safely with gloves and a mask, with a sort of table at a distance, especially if you're in an apartment building, just hang out in your lobby or in front of your building, if that's possible. I live in an apartment building with a front stoop, and I am not running because I run the endorsements process, but if I were, and I've thought about it, like I would take advantage of being able to sit outside my building with a mask, in gloves, providing masks with people if they felt like they needed it, with extra pens and maybe separate sheets of paper, which like is a little bit of an expense, but that is a good use of campaign contributions to catch folks. It's a 10 signature requirement. It was 25 prior to COVID. So I think, especially for big buildings, it may take a little bit of time, but that's one way to do it. Also just slipping flyers under doors in apartment buildings. One of the cool things about the building that I live in that I like a lot is like my neighbors and I tend to communicate with like quarter sheets under the doors to do some building organizing, just to let people know about what's going on anyway. And the same thing that's like, I would like to represent you is the same thing as stuffing something in a mailbox if you don't have access to a mailbox with mail keys. So I have some other thoughts on talking to your neighbors remotely. If your building has an email list, you should take advantage of that. Just as a general practice for keeping people organized in your building, you might want to know your neighbors' email addresses anyway, and pinging them to ask for their help, and maybe setting up a time to meet them and sign the petition in a safe way could also work. This stuff is like when you say it out loud, it's like, oh, this is the process, but it's probably good prep work for figuring out how to get 10 signatures from people for kind of what being on an ANC is like. So
yeah, and make sure you over collect. You don't want exactly 10, because if one of them is botched, you can not get on the ballot, and getting on the ballot is hugely important to winning an election. So, I get at least 5 extra, and then look at your voter file and make sure they actually signed in the right places, and make sure you sign the circulator place. And Alex is right. Say it again?
Yeah, you can sign your own petition.
Yep. So if you live with roommates and they're registered to vote, they can sign too. Just there's no like, uh-oh, that's your partner, can't sign kind of rule. Anybody that can vote for you can sign the petition. Somebody, I believe it was Nick Chiola, shared a place where you can get a free voter file, which is very helpful. Nick, are there phone numbers in that version of the voter file?
No, I gotta give more thought to how I used it, but I do know that it's a pretty robust voter file, to the point where we were able to isolate folks who had voted in the last 4 elections and then run an overlay with a Google map. And then from that, we were able to target specific addresses of people in the single member district who were very likely to vote. That seemed to have worked out very well, and there was a fair amount of information in that file.
That's awesome. Another thing I would recommend doing anyway is getting access to a peer-to-peer texting tool. MoveOn runs one called Spoke. Working Families Party also has access to one. If you can get the Working Families endorsement, you can engage them as a vendor. And I think it costs you 4 cents a text or something. So for not if you can get 6 or 8 people to donate, you can run a texting program. And I think a texting program, if you really run one, would be very likely to generate a couple hundred votes if you come up with some good things to say in your text program. And to the people, and yeah, you should use neighborhood listservs. You should email people, because you want to really be accessible. And lots of people will be happy to sign your petition. People really like helping people solve problems. If you're like, hey, I want to serve the community, I need to get on the ballot, can you help me out? People love helping you out. The best way to make a friend is ask for a favor.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. Is that even a lot of people who may have wayward feelings about politics are often happy to sign to get somebody on the ballot. Is kind of it's not odd. I think it makes a ton of sense actually. And so like I think there is merit to just taking advantage of that. Yeah, Zach has some awesome strategies. And I would also caution though that no one should feel like overwhelmed by this stuff. I think like the first step is if you're interested, declare, pick up the paperwork. If you don't want to do it, that's okay. But the sooner that you do this, the better, so that you can start working out how to collect these signatures. And if you need to use the text banking option, or if you need to, find some listservs to reach out to, then like that can sort of be an evolving process. So don't, I think this is my advice in general for a lot of this stuff is don't let this overwhelm you. Like you've totally got this. And it's a very doable lift. So James, do you want to, if you can, because I know you're putting this in the chat, talk a little bit more about the BOE electronic signatures, because I haven't quite figured that out yet.
Sure. So my name is James Harnett. Hello, everybody. I am the SMD commissioner for 2A08, which is most of George Washington University's campus in Foggy Bottom. I am a senior and I'm graduating in December, so I won't be running again for my seat, but I'm excited about the other students both at GW and across the city that are interested in running. Specifically on the petitioning question for this election, you can ask the Board of Elections to email you your petition sheet, which you can then print out or email to other folks in your neighborhood. If you've got somebody who has a printer and a scanner in their home and doesn't feel comfortable engaging with anyone right now, they can print out the petition sheet, sign it, scan it, and then email it back to you. And then you can use that additional sheet as a valid signature with the Board of Elections. So it is a bit of a cumbersome process, and I wish that we had been able to deploy, or the BOE had been able to deploy basically tablets that you could rent out that are used for some other petitioning tools in DC where you can just get somebody to digitally sign a petition, but seeing as everything is moving forward at a lightning speed, it didn't seem as though they were able to get that set up. I'll speak from my experience as somebody who normally had to get 25 signatures in a district that is mostly college students, folks who may be registered to vote here, mostly are not, but definitely for the most part are not here during the summer. And so I have never been able to get more than, or at least when I ran in 2018, wasn't able to get more than 12 or 13 signatures, because literally out of 2,000 people that were in my census district, there might have only been 10 or 15 registered voters who were still physically present in DC. So I'm glad that they reduced the limit to 10, and now you can do this sort of digital signature process, because that is going to allow folks, students that represent universities that have never been able to get on the ballot before. There's never, ever been somebody to actually get on the ballot for my seat. It's just never happened. And I know there are some other students on this call that are dealing with similar challenges that are running in university districts, or at least that are primarily student housing. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But in terms of the Board of Elections process for this election, it is a bit cumbersome in trying to get folks to quote unquote digitally sign, even though they can't digitally sign. They still just have to print them out and scan it back to you.
I am really, really loving everybody's like signature solutions in the chat. And by the way, I'm kind of tracking all this stuff and taking notes so that I can send what I suspect will be an extremely long follow-up email. So if you're not catching some of this stuff, it's okay. Anything else on signatures and on getting people to make sure that you're on the ballot? I do want to reiterate, collect more than you think you need, just in case. And file your stuff early in case something goes haywire at BOE. You have a day or two to sort things out, and so that you're not running stuff down to the wire, especially like now. I think that's especially true since we're kind of in a different universe for how this stuff is working. So.
Yeah, Peyton, you do have to witness it as the circulator.
Yeah, the only case where that wouldn't be true is if you email them the petition sheet, they print it out, scan it, sign it, or sign it and then scan it back to you. In that case, BOE has waived the rule, but in every single other case, you can't just slip something under a door and hope, if they can't get it back to you that way. It's only if they absolutely cannot be with you in person to sign it.
So, hi, this is Zach Gold. I'm running for SMD 1C05. I was actually on a call with DC BOE this week. They're running, I think, 4 total sessions that are Q&As with their staff about getting on the ballot and various questions like that. They actually said that you can have a signer be a circulator. So you could send someone a petition with their own name as a circulator, and they would just sign it twice, both as the signer, as the petition signer, and then at the bottom as the circulator, confirming that they witnessed their own signature. And then you can add that to your pile of signatures. It's a bit confusing, but it seems like DC BOE is going out of their way this year to make things easier to with all the signatures given social distancing. So I hope that's helpful.
I know there's 2 other individuals who have their hand raised. Alex, I'm not sure if we want to.
Yes, we should totally do that. I am having trouble with the hand raise function. So if somebody just wants to unmute and talk, I, for some reason, can lower all of your hands, but I can't call on you, and I'm sorry about that. So if you want to just go ahead and unmute and talk, that's okay.
Hey, y'all. I am Judson Wood. I had my hand raised. I have a question, and thanks so much for putting this one. I really appreciate it. I had a question about the declaration of candidacy. When I submitted my paperwork, I was told to submit the statement of candidate and then the receipt of ballot access documents. And then they sent me my petition. I had them all signed. I sent it back in. I never got a voter roll. I'm still working on that. But I was never told to submit the declaration of candidacy, and I'm making sure that that's something I don't need to do, or like if I should like take some kind of action to put it back in the right sequence, or what.
The Board of Elections definitely should have received your declaration of candidacy. They're not supposed to be able to give you the signature sheet until they receive your declaration of candidacy, because then there isn't a declaration to tie that to. I would just check with them to make sure that they've received that and that your name appears on the Board of Elections website as somebody who's taken out signatures. And if you go onto that spreadsheet, which they usually update every day, if you're not there, then you should definitely call them tomorrow and sort that out.
It's I'm on there, and like my like even the date I submitted my signatures is on there as well, but I don't think I've ever submitted that particular piece of paperwork, which is very odd to me.
Yeah, I would just follow up with them directly and confirm that they've received that. They have a folder for every candidate that takes out signature sheets or any documents from the Board of Elections. So they should have that in their paperwork. So you can either email that candidate at dcboe.org email, or just give them a call tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Haynes. I had my hand raised as well, so I thought I would go ahead and jump in. I would be running for seat 1C08 in Adams Morgan. I just wanted to ask, I do notice one other person on the call that was that has already requested their ballot, Fiona Clem. I would love to speak with you at some point if you were willing, but I just wanted to ask the question, does anyone have any thoughts or recommendations about multiple people that might be in this chat that are aligned with GG Washington's kind of views running for the same seat, especially if there is an incumbent that might not be here, where that could be problematic?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will take the first shot at that. And I would also really welcome some responses to this from other people who may have negotiated this in the past. What I would say is that I honestly believe that everyone on this call is here in like the good faith of wanting to do good stuff in their neighborhoods. And so, you know, given that, you should definitely reach out to your fellow candidates if you've both declared, since that contact information is available via BOE, and talk and see if you can be supportive of each other. I think part of this is deciding what you want to do with it. You know, the sort of like nakedly political answer is like, if there's a not so great incumbent and there are two really awesome candidates, we would of course love you to sort of parse out on your own, you know, who the best person is to run. I also understand if that, you know, may not be the preferred solution, you know, between two individuals, but like for us, that's like awesome, right? But the thing that I've found, and I think that I have actually talked to a few of you about this, is like mostly with like incumbents too, is that sometimes the first thing I tell people to do is just email the like existing commissioner and see if they're running again, because sometimes the existing commissioner is not like, they'll do it, but if there's somebody that they can pass the torch to, they want to be supportive of that. So I do really encourage you to talk to the existing commissioner, like just as a check to see if they're running again. And then with your potential like opponents, because like I do think the greater good comes from having like one strong candidate. And it sounds like you're heading in, you know, at least the direction of having that discussion. You know, I'm happy to moderate to the extent that I can, like, and I think that's especially true if there's like a troublesome, like, you know, incumbent or another candidate that, you know, maybe is very counter to your views. But I think if you're going into that with like a good faith negotiation of like, we want the best for the neighborhood here, ANCs in an ANC seat is not the only way to be involved. And while ANCs are also really powerful, sometimes like you can have like a lot of power with ANCs outside of the ANC, because you can sort of like spearhead things and help move things over the line and like work with commissioners to help them on projects. So, you know, it's one thing to want to be an elected official, but this is also just, it's like a neighborhood level position. And if your objective is to like do good work in your neighborhood, this is one way, and we're talking about it today because it's the ANC training and the deadline's coming up, but it's certainly not the only way.
Yeah, can I share a story about that, Alex?
Yeah.
So I first ran an ANC 4C in 2014, and there was a very close election between JP Hainsworth and Drew Schneider for, I think that's 4C07. And Drew Schneider narrowly lost and invested his energy into building something called Petworth News, and like dedicated an incredible amount of attention to the community. It has a ton of readership, and he sometimes collaborates with GGW, and like he ended up building a lot more community power that way and doing a lot of good. And so like, you can run and lose, you can avoid running. There's tons of ways. If what you want to do is give to your community, this is a great avenue, and there's a million other good avenues too.
But yeah, specific to like, if there are a couple of folks on this call, like, yeah, I would definitely encourage you to chat. It may turn out that one of you like is actually like kind of relieved to not have to like have to do this, like, or like it turns out that may free somebody else up to do something. Like, it's always worth having that conversation. There's been a couple of instances where like I've just pinged like existing commissioners to be like, hey, are you running again? Somebody's interested in your SMD, and they were kind of like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so like, it would be really great to have somebody step into this, and I would love to work with them. So, you know, that's, I think, totally applicable here. I think Rob had his hand up.
One second here. Yes, hi again. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say, I guess, a few other opportunities to be involved as well. I know many ANCs have subcommittees, and those committees, like for transportation, committees for zoning, affordable housing, there's tons of committees that are looking for volunteers as well. So I know some people who have set up and started an ANC transportation committee in their area. Then they've also ran for ANC chairs as well. So there's so many DC civic associations that I know some people who are currently ANCs and they resigned and they're not running again because they felt that they could have more influence outside of ANC. So they would know how the system runs, and then they would know who to lobby, et cetera, as well.
Let's see. Clayton, I think you're up. I think my unmuting stuff, my power is working.
Okay, cool. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks again for putting this all together. This is awesome. I wanted to ask a question that might be on some other folks' minds as well. I am like very interested in kind of getting more involved in like the neighborhood community, and that's why I'm on this call, of course. But I was curious if you guys would have any like ideas of sort of resources to better understand the work that the ANC is like has done in the past, or the kind of things that like an individual commissioner, such like I know that there's an incumbent in my ANC who's been there for a really long time, and I'm kind of curious if like I have the sense that we have sort of different kind of political leanings or visions for like the neighborhood and the ward or the city in general, and so I'm kind of curious if you have kind of ideas for resources outside of just like meeting minutes from the ANCs, or I think you kind of mentioned earlier that GGWash had like some more kind of localized resources on kind of what's going on in each of these within each of the ANCs. And just more along that, because I want to be kind of conscious of I don't know, not like running and trying to unseat someone who maybe it would be like more effective or better in general, you know.
Totally. That is a super good question. And I think goes to sort of what I was saying before is like, try to get in touch with your existing commissioner and just talk to them and ask them how they're doing. And even if it's just asking if they're going to run again, you know, like see where they're at and try to meet them where they are a little bit. As for resources, I will send to you, the best thing that we have is our 2018 endorsements, which not everyone responded to. So they may not be on there. So that's ours. And yeah, DSA did theirs. I have to dig those up. So you can take a look at these. Some, like honestly, just like some Googling will maybe pull up some stuff sometimes. ANC meeting minutes are really like super valuable. And that is something that you should definitely dive into. You can get a lot out of that, but also just talking to them can be really good. So I would definitely encourage that. And you know, maybe it's not time to run for ANC yet, but there are other things that you can certainly do. The committees are really powerful, and you know, I hope that we're able to provide like more ongoing support for some of that stuff as well. I also want to have James jump in here because I think he had something to add.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. One of the things I do want to note for folks, because I'm sure this is true across the city, each ANC sort of decides through its own bylaws and just traditions how it takes minutes. I mean, I've seen minutes where you can have a very detailed account of a meeting, or other ANCs that just put their resolutions in minutes. And so in terms of getting an understanding of both how the ANC operates and what the program looks like or what it has looked like in the past, I would just encourage folks to go to their local ANC meeting, make sure that you're participating in many of the virtual meetings that are happening. And if your ANC either isn't meeting in August, because there are a number that don't meet in August for a summer break, go out and try to sort of get in touch with or connect with other commissioners and other ANCs and see how their meetings operate. I certainly learned as a commissioner in Ward 2 by going to Georgetown's ANC meetings, by going to DuPont's ANC meetings in Logan Circle and Chinatown downtown, both how to be a better commissioner in terms of what strategies and rules make sense at the ANC level, because most ANCs sort of agendize their meetings differently, and they all have sort of different quirks about them that either makes them more or less effective. So I would certainly encourage you, if you don't see any upcoming meetings with the ANC that you're looking to run for, look at the other ANCs in your ward, look at others in nearby neighborhoods, and see if you can either learn from commissioners in those areas or connect with them if you're having trouble doing that with the ANC you're thinking about running it.
Yeah, and then there's also media coverage of certain ANCs. Like, Drew Schneider, I mentioned earlier, used to write like 5-page summaries of our meetings for years, and they're super interesting. And some of those meetings had some super petty kind of interesting stuff in them. So you can check it out. But I think also there are broad themes. Like you mentioned, Clayton, that you have sort of different political influences and leanings. Some of those will be much more relevant than others. Like how you feel about single payer healthcare or market healthcare just like isn't going to be very relevant to being an ANC. The things that really come up a lot are liquor licensing, business issues, zoning, especially how many units come and how much affordable housing is part of those deals. There's a fair amount about transportation, street safety, street infrastructure. And those are areas where there are hugely different views. And you'll often see fights about parking and protecting parking spaces versus having better transit and safer infrastructure for walking and biking. And those can be really tricky issues, but they're not necessarily issues where, consistently left-leaning people are on one side and right-leaning people are on the other side. Actually, ANC issues don't align particularly well with bigger political philosophies necessarily. So, you'll see in ANC 4C, we had a block emerge of people who said, if you want zoning exceptions that will make your project more profitable, we want to hear about what you're doing to increase affordable housing. And, that had a big impact. From time to time, you'll see huge projects, and ANC 4C pushed really hard in the Hebrew home redevelopment proposals that had more housing and more affordable housing. But some neighbors wanted it to just look like a row house development that would have been more, they said they wanted it to be consonant with the neighborhood. And we were like, that building's been there for 100 years. It's plenty consonant with the neighborhood. It has never been row houses. And you get to have really fulsome, interesting debates like that. And I think it's useful to remember the themes that tend to come up a lot. I know there's other commissioners on the phone. Would you say, what are some other ones that come up a lot besides zoning, transportation, housing, and the ones that we were talking about earlier?
Sorry, Al.
No, go ahead.
Those are certainly the big ones that come up at the commission level. At the single member district level, it's a ton of little things. It can be the local rat problem or the local feral cat problem. Those problems tend to solve each other. It can be, you've got tree issues, you've got potholes, all of the real stuff that affects day-to-day life in a neighborhood. But going back to the ultimate point, I co-sign reaching out to the incumbent if there is one. And if he or she doesn't get back to you or won't talk to you or isn't responsive to either an email or a call, that's in and of itself a pretty good sign that it might be a good idea to run. Because we as commissioners are elected by and accountable to the residents. And if you cannot respond to your constituents, and that varies widely across ANCs and single member districts. That's sort of job number one. So if that's not happening, it is a sign that there is, assuming that's what you plan to do if you're in the role, that your services may be needed and very badly in your neighborhood.
And that was a great note made by Zach and Nick, especially regarding the sort of ANC level issues. I mean, I had an ANC meeting last night, and I would say the biggest point of contention came up around parking and around the balance of extending sidewalks and maintaining residential parking for folks that live in the neighborhood. And so you're going to have to deal with these issues, not only through the rest of COVID, but in your 2 years, if you're elected as a commissioner, in terms of, what your values are. And certainly, there's places for compromise and figuring out a best path forward, but, there will be people who fundamentally disagree with your attitudes about some of these really critical issues, whether it's on transit or housing. And I've certainly found, as somebody who is a proud numbtot and somebody who cares about these issues, especially on my single member district level, want to make sure that everybody knows here that no matter how often or how much you do hear opposition from folks about sort of the denigration of the neighborhood character and what have you, they may well be Democrats and likely are. And it's, you find these alternate means where folks will step up and say, I disagree with you on these priorities. Something that's, I think, influential in our neighborhood, and especially is true in others across the city, is the impact of universities and how they sort of fold into these conversations around transit and housing and community life. So you may see the issues that Zach and Nick have addressed manifest in different ways and manifest with different institutions that are a part of your neighborhood. And so I think recognizing what those challenges are is going to be important to figuring out how you want to balance these concerns. But certainly those are really the most important things you'll see on both the commission level and the single member district commissioner level.
I want to point out that Greater Washington through Greater ANCs has done some really path-breaking work to increase cooperation and coordination across ANCs and across policy matters, because really nothing like this existed 10 years ago. And then, the 14th Street bus campaign was one of the first campaigns, and it was really successful because we got folks from Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 4 together to connect around it. And there have been tons of campaigns since. And some of the commissioners who were involved have really built relationships and have continued to be community leaders. And the longer you do it, and the more you listen to people and the more you fight for them, the more you become a leader. And leaders in communities have power. And in a lot of places, they can coordinate really well with council members at both at large and their ward council members, and can be very influential on policy. If you're from a ward where your council member either proactively likes to work with smart ANCs who care and do the work, or is scared shitless of a challenge. And either way, you can be very influential. And I think in some ways, we talked a lot about what do you do to get elected? And I want to offer the most important lesson I learned after I was elected, which is there's an almost never-ending stream of things you have to react to. If you're in a big commission like ANC 4C or 1A, that has 8 or 10 or 12 commissioners, you're going to have an almost constant stream every meeting of several Board of Zoning adjustment cases and requests for comment, notice of intents on traffic pattern changes and things like that. And you can just spend all your time responding to them, but don't take the bait. Think proactively about what your 1 or 2 objectives are for that term. You have 2 terms. What is one achievable, winnable goal that you can make happen that will make your life better and other people's lives better, have at least one proactive goal. Either a change in policy for how your ANC works, a thing that will make your community better. You know, I'm going to just say it again to help it be memorable. But for me, that was getting an express bus on 14th Street. And no vote I took in a zoning case will have a more important lasting impact, and no liquor license dispute will be more significant. You know, so don't just vote on the things that come to you. Be proactive on at least one or two things a turn. And if it and reach out to other commissioners, support their work. They'll support your work. You can do incredible things together.
Yeah, I definitely want to second some of that and give some more sort of context for the GGANCs. So like 2017, 2018, it became kind of pretty clear to us that we needed to sort of like collect what was like a little bit more haphazard internally for us as an organization. You know, we had been reaching out to commissioners who were in like certain key areas like Zach with like projects like the 14th Street bus lane. And, you know, with 2018 being the first year that we did endorsements, having the responses to those questionnaires available, we were able to put people that we endorsed on a listserv so we could communicate with them. My goal is to make this a lot more robust in the coming years, because we have an awesome start with this, and it's been really powerful to be able to connect people to each other. And if you're running for a part-time volunteer position, you know, I work for an advocacy organization full-time, sort of my coworkers, and I hope that, you know, we can provide to you like some of the resources that we have. So, you know, we have access to our own email address. We can try to target some GGWash supporters and like pull that stuff together for you. But Zach has some good examples of like just like projects that were in existence, like when he was serving on the ANC. I think that's like that's true for a lot of commissioners, is that like you can definitely come in and be proactive about something and have a goal, and you should absolutely do that. And then like there's like the bigger sort of like guiding structure of like what the district is planning and doing at any given time that you'll like run into when you're in this position. Definitely don't get distracted. Definitely have goals in mind. And like just be sort of like cognizant about what's happening, and don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, we're certainly here for that, but also just reaching out to fellow commissioners can be really helpful. So sometimes what our role in stuff is just to be like, hey, I was talking to so-and-so in, you know, like 1D, and like, oh, I was also talking to someone in 4C. Like, you know, that might be a conversation that I have, and it's like, you two should talk. Just because like there's sometimes like gaps in this, and we're able to facilitate some of those conversations. So I am personally really excited to do a lot more of that, because I do think that that's something that as an organization, Greater Washington can build out, and I hope you'll all be patient with us as we figure out some of that stuff. But that's something that I like very much want to do, that I think we have a strong start with. But in the same way that I would always encourage you to talk to your existing commissioner, I would also encourage you to talk to your fellow commissioners if you're in this role, and see what they have to say. I also wanted to call out Jamila's comment about asking like your neighbors about your current commissioner, just asking people what they think about your current commissioner. That kind of stuff can be helpful too, to get a sense of like what your neighbors are into, and like worst case scenario, maybe you don't run, but you talk to people more in your neighborhood, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that's also a good way to gauge if people's needs are being met, or if there's kind of a leadership vacuum there. I can talk more about that, but we have some really awesome questions in here. So I want to make sure that we're getting to some of that. I think also a few folks have had their hand up, so let me try to do some grouping of stuff. But one last question to Peyton's point about like caucus, like groups of stuff. People don't really run on like slates and caucuses in DC, in part because the entire, like the meta commentary there is like the entire city is Democratic, and like our elections are kind of this weird, like having the council be what it is, which I think is really valuable, like has some downstream effects on that. Most people here, I think, are here because they read the blog, which is awesome. And I know a few of you know each other just from your work, from reaching out, from being social, and the constraints of that are totally different now, but leaving room for like the sort of chance encounters of people that you get to know through this stuff can be really powerful. We can try to systematize this and standardize this as much as possible. And I hope that as an organization, we can do more of that in the future, but also just being willing to reach out to people and talk to them can just be like incredibly valuable, and is like, I love that about my job, and I hope that that's something that, you know, we can help you do too. So I'm gonna, I think, Zach, I know your hand's up. Did you have like a specific point to that before we kind of move on to some of the other issues?
I had a question for some of the current commissioners, but I know there's a lot of people with questions. So if they have, I don't want to jump the line if there are other hands up.
Okay, cool. Kamalika, I think you had your hand up. Did you have something on that?
I was just wondering, I think it was, what was it, last year or the year before, there was the legislation on technical support for ANCs. Did that ever happen? Support?
It
is, let me check. It did not.
So, sorry, I can jump in on this. I testified at the budget hearing for this past fiscal year about this very item. So it was in last year's fiscal budget where Robert White's committee, which oversees ANCs, set aside, I think it was maybe $200,000 or $250,000 for ANC technical support, but it was mostly line itemed as a mobile app that was going to somehow make our lives like 1,000,000 times easier. And that money never got spent from what I'm familiar with, and no app ever existed that, you know, came into fruition. What ANCs really need are dedicated staff and professionals that can help us both during our meetings and as part of sort of a citywide effort to help make our meetings more accessible. So if we had, say, a citywide ANC officer or team that could help us live stream our meetings when we go back to being in person, or, you know, provide technical assistance in just getting us all on Zoom. I actually had to write a guide that I sent around to every ANC commissioner in the city about how to use like a Zoom webinar, because all of this process was completely new to us and we didn't know how to transition a meeting that had typically been a very interactive and in-person exercise where on every single item and issue, we're providing opportunities for the public to share their thoughts, and there aren't really a lot of technical platforms out there that allow us to do that. And so ANCs in Ward 2, for example, and in ANC 2A, we have employed a part-time staffer who helps us set up our meetings, set up our agendas, reach out to folks that are coming in for applications before the ANC. And he's absolutely wonderful. And he's also employed by a number of the other Ward 2 ANCs. And also he eats into a big part of our budget and how much money we're given from the district. So it would be great if that wasn't the case, and it would be great if we had professional staff who worked across the city, especially in wards that either don't have great websites, or for ANCs that don't really have accessible means of getting out information about when virtual meetings are happening, or where you can find their minutes or agendas or information about commissioners. And so I certainly think that's something that we need to be talking about more as a city. And in the process of how we talk about the council and think about the council's role in all this, I certainly encourage everyone on this call to follow all of the reporters, the local reporters on Twitter that engage and work on the council. I am not somebody who watches every council meeting, but it is really great to start to see some of the high level items that do come out of the council. One news agency I specifically want to call out is run by a guy named Gordon Chafin. He's a single guy shop who mostly reports on DMV related transportation priorities, but specifically will come to an ANC meeting and report on what they're seeing, which is a rarity of what we find across the city. And so I certainly think on investments that the council can and should be making, they need to really consult with ANCs more about what we actually need, because I don't know of a single ANC commissioner who said, yes, the thing we need is an app. So it would be great if we got more technical and sort of permanent support from the Office of ANCs, which is a permanent office that is housed under the council, but we haven't seen that as of yet.
Let's see, there was one thing that I wanted to respond to specifically in here. Oh, the other point that I was going to make is that there's like a huge variety in like ANC capacity and stuff. And in the same way that I want to encourage you not to be super stressed out by like the signature collection procedure, like don't, a good way of handling this stuff is just like, you can definitely make a website. I love that people are dropping in, you know, use Wix, use WordPress. A lot of these sites are free. I actually made like a free WordPress site for a work thing the other week and was like amazed at how much easier it's gotten. Somebody in your life probably knows how to help you set up a website or send an email list, and they can give you a little bit of assistance. So don't be afraid to ask for help, kind of to Zach's point. I think that stuff is super helpful, but also don't feel like this needs to overwhelm your life. Like definitely enjoy what you're doing for sure. You know, I think some commissioners have found a lot of success in sending emails, like keeping an email list of their constituents to communicate with regularly. All that stuff is optional, but you should do what makes sense for you and for your constituents. Zach actually pointed out that I should maybe talk about doing just organizing one-on-ones, and there's a lot of like great tips out there for how to have a good, you know, 30 to 45 minute conversation with people. But this goes for sort of like my experience at GGWash, but also like if you're talking to a constituent or maybe talking to an existing commissioner, is again, be, you know, competent, thoughtful, caring, and ask questions that you want to know the answer to. You know, if you're spending time with somebody, you're both there for your time, but you're also asking for their time to make it worthwhile. And, you know, kind of go through your who, what, when, where, why, and how, but, you know, talk about why you're there and the information that you need. So, you know, talking to existing commissioners, just saying like, hey, are you interested in running again? Oh, you're running again. Okay, that's awesome. How can I support you and how can I get involved? That's a really great place to start. And then, you know, even just asking what your experiences in the neighborhood are and what's it like to be a commissioner are like really great conversation points. For constituents, you know, asking people where they think there are gaps and what they're not experiencing in their neighborhood and sort of what they're interested in seeing is a really good place to go with that. But I definitely like encourage you to just talk to as many people as possible, and being available and present. Like people will reach out to you via Facebook, people will reach out to you via Twitter. And definitely answering your email is like, has been like such a huge component of my job. At some point I was like, I cannot believe nobody told me that this would require so much email, but that's actually a really cool part, is to be able to talk to people. So I can definitely share more on that in a follow-up. And I want to make sure that I'm hitting everything here. Definitely agree on like saying the stuff that you care about in your campaign, picking a top 3, even a top 1 or 2, and just being like, I am the bus candidate, or I am the affordable housing candidate, can go a long way into helping things be like legible for other people to understand what you're about and you're interested in.
One thing, if I could just expand on that quickly, something that I always thought was sort of how it just worked in this city is that, especially on transportation issues, and you hear this a lot when you especially are getting confrontation from community members about what is the best way to manage a transportation change, is people will demand, I want to see the study. They want to see the numbers behind why you've recommended something, or if you've identified a street or an intersection in your single member district that you want to fix. Something that I found a lot of success with when I campaigned is that there's this block right in the middle of my district and right in the middle of campus that really shouldn't be a street. It should be a pedestrian plaza that folks are able to cross and not be worried about getting hit by a car. We see stories in our student newspaper almost every 3 or 4 months about how somebody almost died or got hit by a car and sent to the hospital on this specific block. But we didn't know what to do about it because DDOT said that our neighborhood's long-term planning study is still more than 2.5 years away from getting funding. So it isn't our turn yet to sort of get a neighborhood study. So what the ANC decided to do is we hired a contractor that came and did their own traffic analysis of the street and came up with their own recommendations. I dropped a link to an article that was written about it, and it cost us $5,000 to get a study of this sort of area and to come up with sort of medium, long-term, and short-term recommendations that we then took to DDOT and said, this is important to us. We want you to see you we want to see you do something with this. And usually when they're talking traffic engineer to traffic engineer, they're able to move things forward faster than they otherwise would have. And so I certainly would encourage folks, as you think about running and as you think about what you want to run on, creative uses of ANC funding is absolutely something that you can campaign on. And if there is something, an intersection or something that's broken in your neighborhood that you feel like needs just a little bit of money to get a plan together, that's certainly something that I would encourage you to do.
ANCs have budgets, which is like an important addition to that, which I forget exactly how they work, and James may provide some detail on that, but I don't think there's any like 1D commissioners on, but as far as I can tell, like the Mount Pleasant ANC is running like an entire mutual aid program with like savings from their budget, which is exceptional and kind of amazing. But there are allocations to ANCs, which some use to rent office space, some use to sponsor events, some use to like hire engineers for traffic studies, that kind of thing. So the normal politics of getting a decision around that apply, but that is an available resource. So.
Yeah, you hit it nail on the head. So we get quarterly allotments from the city. It's not much, but your ANC probably has a savings. Ours, I think we have about $50,000 in our savings account, and out of we get somewhere around $7,000 or $8,000 in annual allotments. I'm not sure exactly how that breaks down. It recently went up a little bit, but I would certainly encourage you to look at the treasurer's report for your ANC to get an idea of how much money there is to work with.
And I do want to note Nick's point that a lot of times what you hear from residents is that they don't know who their ANC is, or if they do, they can't get in touch with them, or like they don't respond to emails, but then when you try to call them, they don't respond to that either. And like, just, I know that I know I've been saying this a lot, but just to reiterate that being present and available can really go a long way with something that is this kind of level of community engagement. So you only have like 2,000 constituents, so like, and they're not all going to be contacting you. And I think that like that, just being available, being able to be contacted, like a clear website is part of that, but just checking your inbox goes really far. And that is kind of like my criteria for like where to start with being a good ANC commissioner is just like, are you available if a constituent comes to you?
Alex, that's a great point. And I really want to emphasize it because I imagine there are a lot of people on this call who are wondering, are you going to make a run? Do you think you can do the job? And I mean, to paraphrase Yogi Berra, half this game is 90% email. And that's not all you can do. You have to, there are meetings and you want to be active and out there in the community. But when you're communicating with residents and serving residents, you are dealing with a number of DC agencies and different people at those agencies. And the ability to manage the inbox, the amount of information that comes in every day, both from residents and from the city, and to communicate with DC agencies in a way that is clear and has a timestamp record, so when there's ANC or when there's agency turnover, those issues don't get lost. This is really, really critical stuff That's sort of the gears of the job that gets missed too often, and it has consequences for residents. So being able to manage, email is a really significant and underrated part of the job.
I think this is probably a good time too to talk about what great weight actually is, which is the legal power that ANCs have. Great weight is like literally one line in the Home Rule Act, which is our governing document in the District of Columbia. I will pull up the actual line, but what it means is that the relevant agency, the relevant body, is required to respond to ANCs. And so that doesn't mean that ANCs can object to a new housing development and it won't get put up, or object to a new bus lane and it won't go in. What it does mean is that the agency needs to respond to their concerns. So most projects that exist in the district, especially compared to other cities, have gone forward in maybe a form that is not exactly what was initially planned, but most of the bigger projects here, including transportation, including developments, which is the stuff that we're best versed in, have moved forward. But the agencies really heavily involve the ANCs because they are legally required to give a response to ANC commissioners. So the clearest example of this is some of the bus lane projects. Zach talked a little bit about 14th Street, and he had to jump off, but the 16th Street bus line, or bus rapid transit line that will be under construction in 2022, required a lot of heavy input from relevant ANCs in Mount Pleasant, DuPont, and further south. So that was something where this project is going ahead. There was opposition to it. There was support for it. We can certainly discuss the merits of that all day, but the ANC's role in that was not really voting, yes, we want the bus lane to happen, or no, we don't want the bus lane to happen. It was, we have received the plans for the bus lane and now we need to submit comments on it, and then the District Department of Transportation will respond to us. So it's a lot of back and forth. You kind of see the same thing with liquor licenses, is that ANCs can, this has happened a few times, especially around this was more of an occurrence around U Street 10 years ago, where you saw a lot of stuff opening. The ANC would sometimes vote for an expanded liquor license or vote against something, but the district would usually would sometimes agree or sometimes disagree, but in all sort of scenarios, the district had to respond to the ANC. So it's a little bit confusing, but that the emphasis is really on the advisory part of Advisory Neighborhood Commission, and I think that's where ANCs have a lot of power to, if you want to negotiate with developers to say yeah, you can add more density, but we want more affordable housing, that's when you can start really having that conversation, because ANCs are in this advisory role. If it's a negotiation over parking, the ANC can say I would hope that we could have a more robust conversation about taking away parking if it's not really being used, especially by neighborhood residents, to install transportation, especially if you have overwhelming support from neighbors for that. So those are some examples, but that's the power that ANCs have. And so all of this stuff that we're talking about sort of swirls around your capacity as a commissioner to really advise on that stuff, elevate your constituents' concerns, and get information back to them about what's happening in their neighborhood. So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of there's not an easy way to explain that. But Rob, did you?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, this is Rob speaking through a different interpreter, but with an ANC for NOA, yes, the communication, they did email me, and what can we do to get your support for our project? And I was in a good position to tell them that they needed to add more housing for people who make 30% of base income based on, or additional for bike parking or whatever, for whatever the project. So it was a good example. Go ahead.
Cool. Cool. I want to, so we're at 7:30. I have this set until 8. And I am happy to stay on as long as anybody needs to talk. And like I said, we're recording this and I will keep track of the chat. So just want to make sure everybody is like stretching or getting water if they need to. Happy to just continue talking. I want to make sure that we do get to some of the like topical questions. I will say, I personally do have a great answer on dealing with MPD, and I would welcome anybody else's insight on that. That is definitely something that I think you should be sensitive to in this role going forward. And one of my sort of immediate just like things to look out for is that if you are, you know, talking to business owners or, you know, talking about public events in your ANC, a good thing to consider is, you know, how can we maybe do this without relying on MPD? That will alleviate like costs of what you're looking at. That's a big factor. But there also may be some community-based solutions that you might want to talk through with your counterparts and with your constituents to sort of reduce that reliance on a police presence. And those are like street festivals, like business surveillance, like stuff like that is like things that come in front of ANCs, and that's definitely worth paying attention to and being, I think, a little bit more thoughtful of in the future.
Yeah, Alex, that's it was a good question. I'm glad you brought it back up again. It's certainly increasingly delicate, you know, and especially for the role of ANC, who does have a fair amount of contact with MPD leadership in each service area. So the basics, MPD is broken up into sectors and then what you call police service or PSAs, police service areas, which are more hyper local in nature. You know, I got to know my leadership of my particular PSA. It gives me the ability, you know, residents will reach out to you. You know, I prefer them reach out to me than to call 911 in many situations. Sometimes you can redirect to leadership. And that's at least a more effective route that doesn't involve calling 911 and making a car go over to deal with, you know, people standing on the corner or a situation that might not warrant it. For other situations, I redirect to the Department of Behavioral Health, and I've been able to establish contacts within that organization, you know, to deal with more of the mental health issues. So one thing I have tried to do over the past couple of years is find ways to redirect residents from just calling 911 at, you know, the full spectrum of situations that residents like to call 911 for.
Rob and Rob's interpreter.
Yes. Hello. I see it's a really good question in the chat about how we can negotiate with a developer and with a lawyer. I do admit that that really is a scary part about the job, and if you want to get it right, but what we should be able to go through as much as possible, own a lot of meetings. You can host a lot of meetings in your ANC, in zoning committee, or the main ANC meeting, and you can ask your neighbor, you can ask other ANCs whatever they want with a developer, and especially if you advertise a lot. And then activists for affordable housing, you can have a lot of specialists and experiences, and then you can have tips on how you can negotiate with the developer to maximize the amount of affordable housing in your area, how to maximize the traffic benefit.
One other thing I'll just note on that, we, ANC 2A, our latest PUDO that we had to negotiate was actually with an office building that was changing its zoning variance from being a university educational facility to being commercial office space. We were still able to, because they weren't actually building housing, we couldn't say that they would directly build housing as part of the project. We did negotiate a payment that they would make to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that is also something that you can pursue in your negotiations with a developer. We also had them put down the entire cost of both updating or 2 local parks, fixing 2 intersections, and actually rebuilding a traffic light system that for far too long hasn't been working for folks, and also make sure that the building itself in the retail space was going to house a early learning or a child care center that would be affordable to the people in the neighborhood. And so one of the challenges we have in Foggy Bottom is there's just far too few families. We've got a lot of college students. We've got a lot of single adults. We've got a lot of folks who have been living in this area for 30 years, but we don't really have a lot of young families, people with children who either attend our in-boundary school system or are looking for affordable options. And really that's pushing people out into other parts of the neighborhood or other parts of the city. And so definitely be open to finding interesting and sort of nuanced tools, especially if the facility that's being built isn't necessarily a housing development. You can still make your neighborhood and your single member district a more affordable and sort of well-centered place to live.
Yeah, I would, PUD negotiations are a big, complicated, there's not a good precedent exactly for how to work with them because every project is totally different. And that is it makes it hard to give examples of stuff, but I think this is a good example of when it is really valuable to reach out to other ANCs just to see what they asked for in the projects that they may have negotiated on. So that's something where I hope that there's some usefulness for skill sharing. But with PUDs, and this is really a whole other topic, there's 26 public benefits that the community, which is not super clearly defined legally, and so it often falls to ANCs can negotiate, and this ranges from cash payouts to community groups to new tree boxes to certain parts of or certain units of affordable housing. It's a really long list of stuff. It's in the DC code, and so it's complicated, and it's okay to be overwhelmed by it. So that is this whole other sort of corner of things that you may want to dive into. But also your commission may not actually see a PUD if you're only there for 2 years and there's not one getting built. So again, that's something that I would urge people to definitely reach out. That's something that the bill that we were talking about earlier, the ANC assistance bill, which Brianna Doe introduced, is specifically designed to help ANCs have more expert resources to navigate PUDs because they are complicated and they're not something that you're necessarily dealing with all of the time. So they're huge, they're important. It's a really important negotiating point, but they're also not they take several years sometimes, and it may not be in front of your commission. So definitely something that is worth finding people who have figured that out. And also it's worth trying to, if you can, reach out to other developers sometimes for second opinions. And that's something that I'm trying to figure out how to better connect like some people who are willing to talk about how this process works when it's not the project they're working on, because like that's a way that you can learn some really interesting stuff about this. So again, like more asking questions, which can sometimes be a challenge. But yeah, PUDs are big and complicated and hard, but definitely a good time to start finding like other people who have worked on them, other examples, and really just like asking questions that I think are in good faith that move the project forward, but also get you what you want. People like both within the district government and on development teams are like, I think find it like, trying to think of how to say this in a politically correct way, is that like, if you are like walking in to negotiate a project and you're saying like, we're happy to work with you, but we have questions about this and we want to understand this better because like these are our goals and we are unified on this set of goals, like that gets you really far, especially with people who are negotiating for a living, which is basically like what a developer is. So keep in mind that they are finance bros with spreadsheets and not community outreach specialists, and like take on some of that responsibility. That is my secret for dealing with developers, is don't expect them to do that kind of work. They probably didn't budget for it, but you ostensibly know your constituents in your neighborhood better than anybody else in this position, and you can work to represent them well. Do we get, oh, sorry. Trying to look at some of this stuff in here. We do not, I can try to talk people through if they have more questions about PUDs elsewhere, like how they work, because I deal with this for like the housing part of my job. But like, it's not something that we've done training on otherwise, I think, because everything tends to be different. I'm trying to think, like Hebrew Home, which Zach was talking about, is very different than a lot of the, and that was actually a map amendment, not a PUD, which is a whole other distinction than the stuff in like NOMA, for example. And it's okay if you don't know that stuff. There's a lot of things that will come to you in this position that like you can make decisions on when it's in front of you. I feel like that was a very clumsy explanation, but I think the cool thing about the ANC position in development politics is that you can pay attention to the like sort of minute details on this stuff and figure out like where you're negotiating from and what kind of benefits you want to ask for. So that is sort of my spiel on that.
Zach, I see that your hand's still raised. Do you still have a question?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, thanks. For the current commissioners and former commissioners, I was wondering what your involvement in the community or advocacy or to your particular ANC was prior to running, and how, if there was involvement, how you leveraged that in your race. Thank you.
So I can answer for me. I moved to Edgewood in 2016. I've been in DC for about 10 years now, and I ran in 2018. My involvement in community meetings, advocacy before that point was basically zero. I had followed it casually and was aware of what was going on, but had never been to a community meeting before I ran for ANC. And I actually found that to be somewhat useful in that it allowed me to approach the often contentious issues that we deal with at ANCs with sort of a fresh look, unencumbered by, battles that had been going on for years, without any preconceived notions of what the right answer was or who the right, which group of people were right. I mean, you'll find a lot of these issues, even quote unquote small ones, can be very complex and divisive. and being able to come in sort of a fresh approach, I thought has helped me over the past 2 years, where I've been able to sort of take an objective as much as possible look at things. So I guess the upshot for that is, if you haven't been involved to this point, don't let that be a deterrent. I mean, it can be an asset, both for running as ANC and serving as ANC.
Hi, I'm Tripti Patel. I'm actually a colleague of James Harnett. I actually serve on 2A. So my involvement before I became an ANC commissioner was, so if many of you have lived in DC in like the past 2 years, so there was something called Initiative 77, which was to lift the floor of what tipped workers were making in the District of Columbia. And so I became one of the faces of the Initiative 77 battle. And when my former council member basically said my vote and my voice didn't count, I didn't get mad. I decided to run for office and get elected. And so now in my official ANC capacity, not only do I uplift, the causes of my fellow colleagues, but I still continue to be an advocate for one fair wage in Washington, D.C. And it's, basically what I've become known for. I think more people remember me as the girl from Initiative 77 than anything else. And I didn't even realize about running for ANC. I had friends that were ANC commissioners. It was actually fellow activists in the movement who actually convinced me to run. At first when they were like, you need to run for ANC commissioner, I was like, why me? And they were like, why not you? And I said, give me the damn paperwork. And that's how I became an ANC commissioner. And true story, people were talking about this. So I actually knocked my opponent off the ballot because he didn't do his paperwork right. So if anything, make sure you do your paperwork right and don't be afraid to challenge someone. I know some people always frown upon challenging a fellow opponent. Do it. I think I'm probably going to end up challenging my opponent again because he does not think to come to meetings like this to hear feedback. So definitely do that. Definitely uplift people. So I am actually the District of Columbia's first Indian American woman ANC commissioner. So I'm really happy to see a lot more Indian Americans running for office. I see a couple of South Asians up here, so mad props. I'm kind of tired of being the only one up here, so I need some South Asian love up there on the ANC Council. So yeah. Anyways, I think you just got to be fearless. I mean, the winner is going to be the one that hustles the most. I mean, I think kind of shaking up things a little bit is good, and like I said, James Harnett's been a wonderful colleague in the last 2 years. He actually made me run again for office, and then right after he convinced me to run for office again, he tells me he's not running again. So he knows I'm still mad at him for that.
Yeah, Tripti brings up a great point, and I hopefully will never hear the end of that, but I've loved every minute of serving with Commissioner Patel, and is a great partner. And that's frankly, something that, you hear often, that you don't make friends going into elected politics, but I beg to differ. And I've met a lot of great people in this. And I hope that both, whether you decide to run or not, whether you run and win or you run and lose, that you have the same opportunity that so many across the city have had in really developing great friendships with folks and hopefully long-term partnerships around a lot of the important issues that we all understand we have to continue to fight for. The one thing I'll note just on Alex's question around getting involved in the ANC, I went to my first ANC meeting, probably it was my sophomore year in college. I had lived in the New York City, New Jersey area all my life, except for a few times, sort of hopping around the country. And in my time coming to DC, and my first ANC meeting was actually a negotiation around building a helipad at GW Hospital. And so it was this very contentious meeting with folks, very much on one side of the issue and very much on the other. And we ended up having 3 or 4 ANC meetings about it. And there was a student who was currently serving on the ANC who was graduating and was looking for somebody to fill her seat. And knew me because I was involved in sort of some campus organizations and on-campus activism. And at first, I definitely did not think that I was interested in running for the ANC. I didn't think that it was a good use of my time when I saw all this, nonsense happening with Trump, and I thought that that's what I needed to spend my time working on. But realizing both the impact that you're able to have on the local level, especially when you have either an opportunity to impact a big project or have something that you've pioneered on your own, the ability to look back on your time on the ANC and be able to point to the things where that if you weren't there, they wouldn't have happened, or they wouldn't have happened the way that they did. It's a really powerful tool to both get you motivated and excited and feel like all the blood, sweat, and tears that come with this job are worth it in the end. So I encourage anybody that is interested to reach out to the folks that have been on this call, the commissioners, the former commissioners, because at the end of the day, we're all here to support you and make sure that you're ready to take this on if you move forward. So that's all I got.
So I see the question in the chat about disparities in access to technology. That is a great question. It's one area where I really wish the Office of ANCs would step up with centralized support, particularly for hard copy distribution of certain things within single member districts. You won't be able to reach everybody through the many social media channels and email. And that's probably, it's almost an unattainable goal to reach everybody all the time. But you do need to have, I guess, what I'll call a diversified communication strategy. So I do try to collect as many email addresses as I can from residents because that is the easiest way to convey information quickly and the complexity of information that comes down from DC. But sometimes I'll do that through door-to-door conversations. I do occasionally send out flyers or newsletters, and printing and distribution is a bit of a challenge, but it's necessary to reach folks who are not, as online as we all are. I usually, in the before COVID times, would set up a table at the Monroe Street Farmers Market and hang out there once a month. And you usually get a number of people who just want to come by and chat. You can pick up an email address. Now you formed a connection with somebody who may not be, on the internet all the time, but you have a way to communicate with them. So, it's an unfortunate part of a volunteer position that a lot of this has to be done electronically, simply because that's the easiest and way to convey the amount of information. But I do try to mix that with, as much targeted face-to-face conduct. I know where, older residents live, and hard copies from time to time.
Yeah, I think that's it is tough that a lot of the stuff that, ANCs are dealing with a lot of district government stuff. It is coming from the district in a digital fashion. And I will second Nick's point that this is something that I don't know if there's a great individual solution to it, because commissioners are getting emails from the district or emails from the council asking them to do stuff, and it's frustrating. And I think anybody encountering that is right to be frustrated. It's a real access issue, and there's not a lot of good guidance on how to get it to people. This is something that it is worth talking to your council member's office about it. They also may not be responsive, but you're an elected official and they're an elected official. And I think the more that they hear that their constituents' needs are not being met from you, an elected official, that can be really helpful. So I would also encourage you to elevate the issue and say we need accommodations for X or Y that you haven't accounted for, and I can't do this alone. We need help. I don't love that, and it's not a perfect solution, but don't suffer in silence with that. I think agencies need to hear that. Council members need to hear that. Otherwise, like, they don't get it. so communicating that upward is sort of in line with the power that ANCs have with like the great weight that I was talking about earlier. And they have to respond to that, and they have to give you some sort of response. There are going to be things that the district will tell you like fall within its access guidelines, that they have done the maximum to reach out to people. And like, I don't have any great advice for that other than to say, like, you're right to be frustrated. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer to that. And it's frustrating. You know, hopefully that's something that like ANCs do need a lot more resources, and I would love to see like a citywide policy solution to that in the future, so that we're not totally figuring it out on our own. So
I do have just two final things I want to note before I hop off. The first is both in your campaign and if you're actually serving as a commissioner, to what Nick noted, what I found to be very effective in other parts of my district and other people's district is finding building captains, folks that either work or live in an apartment building that are connected to that community there, and relaying information to them so that they can disseminate it through the networks that already exist, is a really helpful way to sort of scale up your outreach rather than having to build a network of your own, which I certainly encourage you to do. But in terms of both getting your message out in your campaign and if you're elected, I found that to be, especially when there's instances where you want to be able to get a message out to as many people as possible, that through folks that you know in specific buildings, you can achieve that. The other thing is a shameless plug for Nick, Zach, Alex, myself, and Rob. Follow all of us on Twitter, because we put out really fire content all the time. And if we're not talking about the ANC, we're talking about something funny. So feel free to follow us and reach out over DM or email us. And I'm sure all of us would be open to doing a one-on-one or answering any questions that you have as you move forward.
Yeah, for sure. And to second that, you know, even for those of you who are not Twitter users, you all have my email. I'm happy to, I'm not going to tell you my phone number on a Zoom call, but I can give it to you elsewhere if you want it. And I'm happy to talk anytime. But I meant to, so we have a new database, which is really exciting because it works a lot better, but also I am still learning it. And one thing I wanted to figure out was how to get people to opt into sharing their email addresses with other folks. I want to be sensitive to like data privacy and sharing information for sure. That is a separate thing, but if you want to like talk to me and I can try to connect you to other people on this call, it's going to be a little bit clumsy, but I'm happy to do that. I am basically working on ANC stuff until forever. So you are welcome to ping me, call me, talk to me, however it makes sense. And I will try to connect you to people who are much smarter than I am to answer questions if I can. So we're close to 8. This was amazing. We had close to 80 people on at some point. There's about 40 of you here right now. I am really honored that you were able to join us. Thank you so much. I am sure there's a bunch of stuff that we didn't address or maybe did not address fully to what you need exactly. And you know, my door is always open. Please reach out to me personally. Feedback is always welcome. I want to connect you to people that can help. And if we missed something or if you want more information on something, I'm happy to try to figure out how to plug the gaps. So. I'm going to hang around on here and manage the chat for a little bit, and I'll be on video, but I'm going to do some typing and texting and stuff. So feel free to let me know if you need anything.